plan to prepare for a drought is a good thing either way. So with that, if you have questions about any of the slides, have ideas for us, comments, this is the direction we're heading, and we look forward to input. Yes?
Need to clarify again to me anyway, how many thousand acre feet of water are you saying we're short? We need to make up. Give me that number.
0, based on our estimate of historical diversions,
How much are we short?
anywhere from 0 to 100,000 acre feet.
So we're short up to 100,000 acre feet of water.
But that only occurred, 100,000 only occurred in roughly 2 out of 40 years.
So what's the average?
92 or 94, the real dry.
So what are we using for an average as a group, or what do you guys think?
I haven't done that calculation. I don't like using averages because we got a plan for that hydrology issue. We need to prepare for those big years so that when you have no reason to ask for supplemental supply, you don't have to ask for it. You don't have to do anything. So I don't know that planning for an average number is good. We could do that calculation. I haven't done it. If we looking at that graph, like,
Less than 60.
yeah, maybe 30 or 40 on an average.
Ask me the question again, Greg. Are we going to have enough water for the next 10 years, the way the agreements are all coming down in preparation of what's going on?
If it works out like that, Joe, yeah.
We don't, I mean,
It's not going to be a problem. We're going to be irrigating all the ground in the town project almost all the time, which we're not on that pace right now.
No, not for this year. I'm just saying that's what you're saying. That's going to be.
Yes, in the back.
Why isn't the work first drafts data developed for the last 11 years?
Yeah.
That's the stuff that we're really, really familiar with whenever we had the crisis. And when, if not, when will that happen?
We haven't. We didn't think that diving into that today to tell the community that the OPAC just gave us, we just established the direction we're headed. We are looking at those years. We have summarized those years actually in a previous report by MBK without the team effort. But we pulled that data. We have a separate report on the quantities that were pumped in those years, the activities that occurred during those years. And that is a report we did separate from this, this contract. And that's being used to springboard our efforts to understand going into the future. I would suspect something like that at the next meeting. You're trying to present something that's some people know a lot about, some people don't know much about. We're trying to build as we go, and I thought, in my opinion, that would have been a lot to cover in a meeting like this, the detail. Yes?
I got a couple of questions. First of all, what time of year, what timing are these things going to happen? When are we going to know that we're going to be short on water in any given year?
The water supply under the KBRA is based on the March 1 forecast. Okay? So they go out and do snow surveys. You see that, I believe there's actually a date. It may be March 5th. But each year, based on that March 1st survey, they estimate the inflow. When we get that report, you know where you're at on that graph. That is the supply pending if you're in one of those real dry years.
That's the same today as it would be under the KBRA? Are we still working off, I mean,
It's the
you
same
said under
for
the KBRA, but is it the same that we're working off of this year, for example?
Well, the forecast exists, and you can look at March 1st and say, here's the forecast, but we don't know. I mean, just with 2010, we don't know. We don't know what we get.
There's not a line. Bureau doesn't have a line to tell you based on March 1 forecast what your supply is, because they kind of run through their models.
I guess I'm a little confused because I know we don't know what we get, but we've been running, this project's been running for 100 years, so they must have a pretty good idea year in and year out.
Well, one of the problems is downstream requirements, fishery requirements are changing and becoming more demanding. So it causes some fluctuations in the supply that they're willing to provide to the So that uncertainty is one of the things that I believe through the KBRA helps provide a more firm, reliable, predictable water supply come March 1.
Okay.
And you can say that in almost any year, you're gonna get 330,
40.
340.
Yeah, I know that. So under this plan, March 1st comes along, we don't have enough water, we gotta kick in some of these plans you're wanting to implement. And I'm assuming from what I've heard now, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's gonna take money to do this. This isn't a voluntary program with no money involved.
Correct.
Somebody's coming up with the money. Did you say the Bureau? You said something. The government, some portion of the government's coming up with this money.
Well, under the KBRA, it's an appropriation from Congress. We said, look, if we're gonna do these actions and we're gonna enter into this agreement and do these things, then this is the cost. You know, we wanna enter those agreements up front with people and be able to do that in a sustainable fashion. If there is no appropriation from Congress, or if that's delayed, that's another question. I mean, I remember in the spring of 2010, we sat around in the water user's office, and you were at many of those meetings, and said, we need to find some money, and we did. So it sucks, and it's not the right way to do it.
So the way this is written, then, if Congress signs on to this, getting the money's not gonna be a problem. It's gonna be sitting there waiting for us on the ground. Well, I mean, that's what, I agree, that's why I'm asking the question. The government's broke, but, you know, if they sign on to this, is that what they're telling us? That money will be available for your plans?
Well, it's not that simple. If we have a plan, we're way better off, we have a way better chance. If Congress passes the legislation, then that authorizes funding. You still have to go to another step and get it appropriated, and we all know that in this day and age, that's going to be a very difficult task.
Right. So, I guess that leads to my final question. What's the fallback plan, no funding?
Well, you then have a plan, you have activities that says this is how you can make up the shortage, right? A water supply. Here's alternatives on how you can make up an alternative supply. Yes, it's gonna cost you money, but at least you have a plan on what those ideas are. And I would suggest you're in a better position there than not having a plan.
Oh, I would agree with that.
So I don't,
If there's no funding, what's the fallback plan?
I don't have a fallback of where to find money.
No, I'm not meaning that. I'm meaning a plan with the appropriation doesn't come through. The printing press is quit and we don't get appropriated money. Are we looking at a fallback plan for no funding of this plan? Whether the KBR is signed or not. If it's not signed, we don't have the money for this plan, right? We know that.
Well, I'm all ears. You've got an idea on how we live with very little water and no funding.
Well, I think we need to be addressing. I think that should be part of your guys'
I think it will be. You know, we're in the very juvenile stages of developing this plan. So basically what's happening now is gathering the background data. And then we look at what makes sense out of that data. And then we make decisions of what to do with it. And so what you're addressing there, Dave, will be what the COAPA board struggles with when we get to the end of the plan. When we have all of this put together, you know, hopefully, yes, there's federal appropriation there to pay for it. If not, how do we make it work? And that will be the debate. You know, you're talking about a plan B. We're not even very far into plan A yet.
I just want to add one thing, Dave. The Water Users Association, so COAPA is going to go through this process and develop these plans. We're going to continue working the legal avenues, the political avenues, the regulatory reform, all those kind of things. That doesn't stop because we do this. So we'll keep working on those things.
Yeah, because I guess my thought is that from what I've heard so far and what I've read, in the KBRA, we're depending a lot on the federal government, and I don't trust them. ever since 2001, I don't trust them. I was one of those guys that said they'll never take all our water. They know the importance of ag, they'll leave some there. They'll split it up, we know it's a tight year. Well, that didn't work. And so I guess I'm still from the standpoint is I don't trust we're gonna get money, so I'm already looking past the money plan. What's the plan B?
Well, does that mean we shouldn't do it?
I never said that. I'm just asking, you know, I haven't seen that yet, and so Holly's saying that's coming down the line, is basically what he's saying. And I do hope that's addressed. I didn't see it on the, you know, the whole thing, but I hope it's in one of those community things. You know, what happens with no money? I mean, I'm not saying this is bad, this is good. You know the water flows, you know the quantities, you know, you look at historical data, because that's what's happened here. You know, everybody's had irrigation water for the last 100 years, except for a few years, and that's, you know, so.
Okay.
Yeah, most of
Yes.
it's man-caused, yeah, I
Most
know.
of it's man-caused, it's not.
Well, isn't Plan D or E or whatever the heck it's gonna be, like always? It's gonna be, we got a way to get water, if everybody in this room agrees to it, or in the basin, it's gonna end up, the growers are gonna end up, if no money comes, that's what we're gonna say, it's gonna cost each grower so much money to get that extra water. Isn't that the bottom line if we don't get funding?
That would be E or F, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the one we want, but that's the way it's.
Right, that's a good point, and at least the plan would have a strategy on the groundwater pumping, quantities, location, where to most efficiently get it, how to avoid crop shifting. Another question back.
Why I asked the previous question about the last 10, 11 years, because what's happening is, and it's very clear that we're having increased demands placed upon a reduced or limited supply of water. And that's why that becomes very critical, not the last 100 years, but what we've seen happen following the ESA and its impact on all of us, and all the regulatory impacts, and then all the additional entities who want to use the same water. And the water supply is not being increased. You only have so much. And so that's why I'm really concerned about the more current data than what we see up here, because the pressure on us for water has been really increasing every year. As we saw in 2010, whenever we had a shut-off for almost the first whole cutting of alfalfa, well into the season. And we could have that happen again this year, who knows?
Right.
And I agree, we have to have some modeling, we have to have something that we can use to predict that increased demand on a limited or reduced supply, because there's more people making claim to the water, i.e. the refuge programs, etc.
Good point.
I can see your problem. In 2001, though, anything you use as a baseline is skewed. Everybody was doing something different. So you can't use from 2001 on to try to develop a plan for what's normal, because nothing was normal. Every time there was a shortage, we did something to affect it, so all the numbers get skewed, and they throw everything out. So that's why he's sticking to before 2001. Because those were the years when things tried to operate normally. And that's what we're trying to get, is to where we can react normally and have a plan of how you're going to react based on what the water year is. You can't go and use what we did in 2001 on and use it as any kind of baseline data, because everything changed.
You've heard the word new normal. Well, I think we're into a new normal.
But why would you use your alternatives that you applied and put them into your baseline?
I
They
think
become your alternatives that you use to react. You don't want to have them skewing your data as to where your baseline is.
I think we're talking the same thing. We proposed, I like your point, because that's the way we're thinking, but also from back there, we proposed to use the experience from 2010
Right.
to grow from, to learn from.
You use
Lessons learned.
2001 on has ways how you react to it and how you can solve the problems, but it cannot be part of your basic plan of what you need to do.
This is great information, good to hear all this, because this is a problem. When we talk about this, everybody just wants to jump to the solution. We're trying to build a little groundwork, and that's gonna have to be done through the environmental documentation. We're trying to, get a good baseline to work from, and that's why we chose those.
The only plan that's been brought up over the years, if you go back over before deep plan over there, and we dig a canal or a pipeline and reroute the water from the refuge back to Anderson Dam, and we can reuse the water again before it ever leaves the valley, for this end of the valley down here. And that was a plan that was thought of 4 or 5 years ago, nothing came of it, but that should be an alternative to be looked at for coming in the future.
Greater reuse out of the sumps?
Yes.
Is that the point?
Yes.
I'm not hiding, I'm right.
I'm not.
More questions?
I think, here in your thing right now, the thing that's happened from, let's say '01, somewhere in the, you can even start in '92 if you want. I mean, that was more, in my view, that was more of a true drought. But from then on, the man-made droughts, the demand on our water has increased, right? We're not dealing with the same flows out of the lake to us, because we aren't allowed those flows, right? How come we haven't had water problems, back in 1960? When your thing showed that we needed a whole lot more water than the KBRA says we're gonna get. But we got it, right? So I think what I'm hearing here, and what you have to address, of course, is that from 2010, 2001 on, how much water, taking the KBRA out of this, how much water we're gonna get and how much do we put in. I mean, that's gotta be part of a plan somewhere along the line.
Right. That's right. That data will all be used to move forward. And that's part of the information that will come into TM4 and future TMs. And we're still working on 2 and 3.
Yeah, and in the meantime, we keep fighting for some of that water back that we've lost to the government.
A lot of people
Or the
refer to
fish,
those
whoever.
periods, those 2001 to 2010, I'm sure you folks do as well, the regulatory droughts. It's not a hydrologic drought, it's a regulatory drought. That's where we do a lot, we don't do work in the San Joaquin Valley, but I'm in the Sacramento Valley. And
But the point on those years like 2010 is, I agree with that, they're regulatory, but it's the combination that kills us. It's the combination of the regulation and the lower water year. Maybe not a hydrologic drought, but that's the killer.
Isn't it history that we only take like less than 3% of the total flow that goes into the lake?
I heard that number last night.
I don't know if
Yeah.
it's fact or not, you're the engineer, but I've heard it, I've been here for 40 years and I've heard that we take less than 3% of the inflow that comes into the lake.
I think that number's 3% of what goes out of the mouth of the Klamath River. I think that's 3%. We use 3% of the total volume of the mouth of the river. And timing and when we use it, I mean, there's some other factors there, but when you look at the aggregate total from a calendar year, that's pretty close, I think.
I think more of an accurate deal for that was we should know the flow we use at the Keno Dam, for example, once it leaves the valley. What part of that do we actually use? What part of that stays in the lake, stays in the tributary, isn't used by ag, that flows down? Because you can't use the mouth of the Trinity. Hell, you've got Shasta, Trinity, you've got all kinds of rivers, big rivers that hit the Klamath River. Yeah, so.
I know we did that calculation years ago, but I can only retain so much. Yes.
Sorry. Somebody else.
What do you mean by water certainty? Like I've seen a lot of places that the PBRE we have water certainty. What is the definition of water certainty?
The definition to me is that, based on a criteria, March 1 inflow forecast to Upper Klamath Lake, you can go across that curve we have. On March 1, March 1, there's a number for this. I can go up and find out what water supply I can expect for the remainder of the season in the time of project.
Okay, so it's a certainty, not if we'll get water, but how much water we'll get. I mean, it's not a certainty we're going to get water, it's a certainty of the date. We'll know how much water.
And that is the certainty of the folks that are signed on to KBRA to allow us to take that water. So I think it's certainty more than just timing. It is telling us an allocation. Today, March 1st forecast, there is no such curve, to my understanding. You can't go March 1st and out to the Bureau of Reclamation and say, what are you going to get?
So in a 10-year forward motion here, if we got this thing all put together, is this gonna kind of go back to our adjudication numbers that we'll be using as future legal documentation, or what are you thinking about that?
Well, I was actually thinking about that on the last question. I mean, one of the pieces of certainty, I mean, I think we all rightfully so think about the Endangered Species Act. But, you know, if you've read the paper in the last couple of days, the other component, there's several, but one of them is adjudication outcomes. Tribal trust is another big one, all of which are dealt with in this agreement. So, I don't think I'm going to exactly answer your question, Joe, but part of the certainty is, you know, we're waiting. The adjudication proposed order that came out was for the tributary stuff. There is going to be one that comes out and says, here's our ruling on the lake levels for the tribal claims, and for a flow requirement outside of the ESA, a flow requirement from Link River Dam to the border. And we don't know what those are going to say. But what we did with this is we hedged our bets, and the tribes have signed. It's a done deal. The districts have signed on. There's a stipulated agreement that says they're not going to interfere at all with project water rights down to that line.
That's what I'm still getting at. Physically, we'll use these numbers in the adjudication process. I mean, that's where.
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you.
Yes.
On the certainty of water, if we decide we want the water in, say, the end of August or September instead of so much in June or July, are we going to be guaranteed that individually that we have the supply late in the year? Cut off?
I can just respond to it this way. The language that says in preparing the OPP, we are to be looking at essentially the historical patterns of diversions that you folks have taken over the years. So here's a block of water, and you have an error bar within each month of your diversions. And it's a pretty good error bar, because of, patterns, preset patterns and things like that. So there is that little bit of pattern issue identified in the OPT. So specifically, can we go way outside of it? I would say not, but following historical patterns, there's a lot of leeway. That's the best I can do to answer that question.
Does that include winter water?
This is not winter water. There's also, trying to simplify things, there's also a winter allocation of water for the ag lands and for the refuge. Okay, that is part of the plan. I didn't think that would be a necessary focus for the initial meeting. I'd rather deal with the tough stuff first. Yes?
Okay, back to the environmental stuff. You're using a few examples from the Sacramento Valley, and I'm very familiar with the San Joaquin River settlement and all that. Years ago, probably about 15, they put a pumping program just like you guys have in here in Los Banos, California. And they started pumping those. Now, you guys need to come up with a plan to deal with the deep water pumping if it starts drying up duck ponds and vernal pools and stuff like that. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, through the ESA, come in and shut those pumps down for a fairy shrimp that sits in them. And we'd like to know what kind of a plan, if we have to go to this deep water pumping, that you would have set up in order to stop You know, they'll come shut the pumps down on the deep water pumping, the ESA will. In this, if we start having to pump a magnitude of water in this plant. And we need a plan to deal with ESA on the ponds that dry up if we have to pump too much water.
I think you made the same point last night.
No, this was not the same point.
Well, I mean, to me, it's using the groundwater resource in a sustainable long-term manner. That's what those words on the goals and objectives. In my mind, that's addressing that issue. How to use that groundwater resource over the long term to address those type of issues, the interaction between surface and groundwater. And that's why the work that's been done recently, now from a groundwater standpoint, you know, the little bit of data of more significant pumping over the last 10 years is not a lot of data to work with for a groundwater expert. But we have, through the USGS, who's doing their work, the report that's coming out, they've done a lot of good work. We are to rely on that, and that's going to address a lot of those issues, not that issue specifically, but it gives us a jump start to use that model in technical work, along with the groundwater expert from CH2M Hill, that I thought was key to this team because of those very issues. He's dealt with those issues. He dealt with them in the Sacramento Valley, the water transfers, the interaction between surface water and groundwater, the percent of water that a well that's 400 feet deep, how much on a percentage basis that impacts the Sacramento River. It is amazing the level of detail they will get into. And Mr. Lawson, that works for Mark out of CH, has had a lot of experience in that regard.
And I think just one more thing, you mentioned the environmental, there's no question we have to look at that, you know, because that has happened, where you'll have a groundwater pump and it'll affect, you know, local, not just somebody's pumping, but also some kind of habitat. So, you know, it is something we'll need to look at and be reverse of that. In some cases, people are going to say, well, the answer is let's line a canal. Well, on lining a canal, there may be an area where that's really a recharge point for the groundwater. So, you know, those are all the sorts of things that are going to have to be included within this. You know, there's no easy answer here, and there's a lot of things that, you know, at first blush you think, well, we'll just do that. But you got to recognize what the impact is of doing that.
In the ops plan too, I have a concern, like, right now our drainage, at least down in this district, down in here, we're keeping our, since 1998, we kept our drain ditches way low. And we're in a scenario where right now, and then everybody's having to drill their house wells and stuff, because it's losing our recharge system. Does that need to be in the plan so we can keep these canals full around here like we used to do?
I think that issue of recharge and the impact that the groundwater pumping over the last 10 years has had, I think that will be addressed, yes.
Come on, yes or no?
Yes.
On the groundwater, have you gotten far enough along the plan with, because I know you got two entities to deal with, and one of them is the Oregon side, which is the Oregon Water Resources Department. And I happen to know they're very hard to deal with. So what are, I mean, have you done any preliminary work with them? I know they did some studies after the 10 one, maybe another year, I can't remember. And are they saying there's going to be groundwater available for this plan?
Well,
or have they committed one way or the other?
we've done some preliminary work, yes. Very preliminary. Okay, we've evaluated the past year's groundwater pumping. OWRD has a report that evaluates the drawdown areas, the impact areas within the basin. So we've met with them on a very initial basis to understand water right issues relative to use of groundwater. And just my reaction from that meeting, it was no different than dealing with the state of California water right issues. In fact, it was kind of more pleasant. So we've done the initial work. I don't have anything to really report to you, but I would say it was positive from my standpoint.
There are things you have to get figured out there, but I mean, remember that department did sign the agreement one. We did a lot when we were thinking about this, how it might work. We did do a lot of homework related to okay, what's the, you know, I mean, if you got a well within a mile of a river or a stream, that is an issue, whether we agree with it or not, it is an issue that we have to be aware of. So we looked at all those things, and I think we have a decent relationship with those guys and have an idea what some of these studies are gonna say, but being aware of the interference issues with the domestic wells, in this area right here, for example, is a big deal. I mean, we gotta be very careful about how we do it, but we think we can do it better than we've done it the last 10 years.
Have you dealt with the evaporation of water? I realize in Sacramento you have quite a bit of it. We have up here much less because of our altitude. Have you brought this into consideration?
It will be. I would say that's more of an analysis being done by reclamation. They've already started it out of their Denver office, is how much water is lost from evaporation.
That's what I'm talking about. Denver is not us.
I understand that, but to have them spend the money to analyze it, the cost to avoid that loss of water from, say, piping all the canals would be a very large cost. And there are numbers through the various reports I mentioned that in our resource index done by other entities, not you, not me, but reputable entities, other engineering firms, Cal Poly out of San Luis Obispo that's done a lot of work. And there's pretty standard numbers for evaporation rates. So there are numbers out there that make that estimate. And then the question is, well, how do you avoid that evaporation? And how much does it cost to avoid it? And is that a reasonable cost? So it is being looked at. I have nothing more, but we'll stay for, continue to answer questions, or try to answer questions. Or we can, looks like we're losing.